This guy, Dou Wei, is Chinese Paul McCartney, or perhaps more accurately, Paul McCartney is Western Dou Wei. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why does this handsome man look like a recluse? Well, it turns out he followed in Macca's footsteps by going off-grid, but more on that later. Dou Wei was born in Beijing in 1969 to a folk musician father and a toolmaker mother. I'm sure she made better tools than Keir Starmer's father.
Dad was a toolmaker.
My dad was a toolmaker.
A toolmaker, highly skilled.
Toolmaker, yeah.
Toolmaker.
A toolmaker.
And he was a toolmaker.
Was a toolmaker.
Toolmaker.
Much like his daughter, who is now also a musician, he started engaging with music at an early age, first learning the flute before entering primary school. His parents split when he was in middle school, and Dou Wei and his sister went to live with their mum. During this period, he heard rock music for the first time. In 1985, at around 15 years old, Dou Wei enrolled in a vocational high school to study psychiatric nursing. While there, he picked up guitar and began making music. 3 years later, Dou Wei joined a music group, where he began performing songs by folk singer Jiang Dawei, and occasional songs by fellow rock star Cui Jian, at both local venues and corporate events. Now, it's important to note that I said fellow rock star even though Dou Wei was not yet performing rock, and that's because within 12 months he had already replaced the founding singer of the rock band Black Panther, and that's where his career as a musician really started. Black Panther's eponymous debut album catapulted Dou Wei to fame, selling over 1.5 million copies and cementing the band as one of the most successful rock acts in Chinese history. Tracks like Don't Break My Heart, written by Dou Wei himself, are still played on Chinese TV and radio to this day. But within half a year of the album's release, Dou Wei had already decided to go his own way. More reliable sources claim this was due to creative differences, whereas more nefarious sources claim there was a love triangle between the keyboardist of the band and Dou Wei's future wife. I'd prefer to believe the creative differences angle, because in 1994, Dou Wei released what I think is one of the most unique albums ever made, Black Dream. To be honest, I can't quite put my finger on what Black Dream is. Wikipedia lists it as an alt-rock and post-punk album, with influences from goth rock, dub and reggae. But I think it's far too special to put into words. Maybe because it's Chinese, you can't just fit it neatly into any Western genre. It's something far too distinct and far too groundbreaking for that.
悲伤的梦。
Isn't that just one of the best songs ever written? In fact, to me, that might be an understatement. Around the same time he was producing this album, Dou Wei's girlfriend, renowned actress and singer Fei Wong, moved in with him in Beijing, and he contributed to her album Random Thoughts. The song he co-wrote and arranged, 誓言, or Pledge, bears a resemblance in its sound to his own 开心电话, while also showing some elements of his second album, Sunny Days, released a year after his first in 1995. Sunny Days stripped out Dou Wei's heavy metal history and leaned more on pop and folk influences, continuing Dou Wei's experimental streak. The influence of Chinese folk is particularly obvious on the first track of the album. You can start to see a transition to less lyrical music, with his melodies getting more attention in the mix, something that comes into play later in his career. Zhang Yadong, a famous producer and frequent collaborator with Dou Wei, later said in a 2007 interview that music is actually very concrete. The notes are simply there, arranged in a particular order. Words, by contrast, are more of an obstacle. Once you hear Dou Wei's album Mountain River, one of my personal favourites, incorrectly listed on Spotify as a 2001 release when it actually came out in 1998, I think you kind of begin to understand what Zhang Yedong meant. But first, it's worth touching on Dou Wei's marriage to his long-term girlfriend, Fei Wong, in 1996. The couple had a daughter, Lia Dou, in 1997, and Dou Wei stepped away from releasing music for roughly 3 years during this period. Mountain River turned out to be his last album before he, like Paul McCartney retreating to his Scottish farm after the Beatles, receded from the spotlight. In 1999, Dou Wei was caught having an affair with one of the leading photographers in the Chinese rock music scene, Gao Yuan, and he and Fei Wong divorced that August, with Wong winning custody of their daughter Lia. A period of musical silence followed. Dou Wei married Gao Yuan, and the couple had a daughter of their own 2 months later. It wasn't until 2004 that Dou Wei returned with his album 8 Fragments, recorded between 1995 and 2003, and named partly for the 8 years it took to create. Since then, Dou Wei has largely faded from the spotlight, something he himself seemed to be striving for. That withdrawal unfortunately took a darker turn in 2006, when he stormed the offices of the Beijing News, destroying office equipment and setting fire to a staff member's car. This was in response to false reporting on his relationship with his ex-wife and his financial situation at the time. Shortly after the incident, he turned himself into the police, and in 2007 a court in Beijing found him guilty of intentional property destruction, but they did exempt him from criminal punishment as the damage caused was deemed to be relatively minor, and instead he was made to pay compensation equivalent to the damage he'd caused. Since then, Dou Wei has only released 2 solo albums, Yangjin Mantra in 2013 and Tian Zhen Jun Gong in 2015, while recording with the bands E-Band, Indefinite and Inequable, or Buyang. I'm not quite sure about that translation. He has also scored several films, including You and Me, which won the Tokyo Film Festival in 2005, as well as the Berlin Film Festival in 2006, and the 2011 film Dragon, which starred Donnie Yen. He hasn't performed live since a surprise headline set at Beijing's Strawberry Music Festival in 2018, and now focuses more on experimental art installations that combine his music with painting, a hobby he'd kept private for years. Dou Wei remains one of the most influential figures in Chinese rock history, with a footprint, direct or indirect, on nearly every rock musician in China. His retreat from fame and his choice to live basic has become something of an internet meme in China, but almost always in good faith. There's real admiration for someone who was once one of the biggest names in Chinese music to end up this unassuming. So, check him out and see what you think, and let me know in the comments. Do you think he was right to do what he did to that reporter? I mean, is setting a car on fire really any worse than when Paul and Linda McCartney wrapped up a used nappy from their baby daughter and mailed it off to a journalist? Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you for the next one.